Darren Aronofsky is back, and apparently he didn't alienate enough people with his previous biblical parable, Noah, and so he's back to try and do it again with his new movie, Mother. So straight off the bat, the Bible. I say this because there really is only one lens in which you can view this movie. First of all, because the symbolism is so overt throughout the entire film that it's really impossible to avoid. And secondly, because Aronofsky in interviews has already been very open about how to interpret the film and the fact that it's essentially an environmentalist film disguised as a biblical parable. You've got Javier Bardem, who is a poet slash artist slash writer, and he lives in this house in the countryside with his wife, played by Jennifer Lawrence, and together they're restoring the house that was burned down in a fire. And actually it's Jennifer Lawrence who is the primary caretaker of the house. She's the one who is fixing everything up, and you see her at the beginning of the film taking great care as to how she's going to repaint the walls, as to how she's restoring everything in the most sort of traditional and artisanal and artistic way. And then throughout the film, people just start invading the house. It's really told in this perspective of a home invasion film. So you've got more and more people coming into this home, and as a result of that, they are also just egotistical, careless assholes. And as more and more of these people flock into the home that Mother built, they are destroying it. So right off the bat, you've got Bardem, who is a stand-in as a god, creator-like character, and Jennifer Lawrence is, the movie's called Mother, there's a reason. She's basically Mother Nature, taking care of the environment in which they both live, taking care of paradise. She's also like a stand-in for a Virgin Mary sort of figure, so she kind of mixes every sort of matriarchal element you could imagine in religion, but this whole idea of Mother Nature is also sort of more paganistic take on Christian religion, which I thought was kind of interesting. And there's a lot more weird takes on the actual scripture in the Bible that if you actually reread them from a pure biblical, pure scholarly standpoint, really don't make that much sense. It's a very liberal, kind of hippie-ish interpretation of the Bible, which I don't have a problem with, really. It's just, I thought I'd put it out there. And so the beginning of the film, the first half, is essentially like the first part of Genesis. From a dense forest to dark pine, Mount Ida rises like an island. And if you thought that was on the nose, you clearly haven't seen Mother yet. The first part is essentially one part of the book of Genesis, that starts off with God's creation of the earth, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and it even ends, the first part of the film ends on a sink that breaks within the house and causes flooding and everybody to flee the house. So Ed Harris as the Adam stand-in. Michelle Pfeiffer then shows up. She's clearly Eve, and both of them break a very important stone that Javier Bardem has placed in his office, which he doesn't like people to go to. And they break it, and they are cast out of paradise, essentially. Their two children show up, Cain and Abel. If you know anything about the Bible, you know what happens. The whole house floods, and then you get to the second part of the film, which is less a sort of meta-fable on the fables within the Bible, which the first half really seems to be. The second half is more like a take on our present-day world. Not the present-day world, but let's say the last 2,000 years of our history, not anything really taken from the Bible. So Javier Bardem comes out with a second book. He's really inspired, and then all of a sudden, with this second book, hundreds and hundreds of people start flocking to his house. They come to worship him. They come and they tell him how much their book has changed their lives, and then they start invading the house. They start having wars over who's right on which book is better, whose interpretation of the book is more just, and whilst waging war, they obviously completely destroy the house in which they are invited, essentially the Earth. So yeah, it's about as subtle as a giant kick in the nuts, and I was reading a lot of criticism about that specifically, and I don't really have a problem when films are overt or easy to interpret. That doesn't really bother me very much, especially in this sort of film. And if you've ever seen a Darren Aronofsky movie in your life, you'll know that subtlety is not his strong suit. I mean, I love the guy, but just look at everything he's put out. It's pretty in your face and grotesque and, not all that hard to interpret. But what he's really good at is emotionally, viscerally engaging the audience. I mean, I don't think anybody can look at, like something like Requiem for a Dream and not just absolutely feel disgusted by the end of that film and feel really dirty. And you may think that it's over the top and it's a really ridiculous representation of drug addiction, but I think that it does get at the core of maybe not being realistic, but at least, inciting a sentiment of what drug addiction can be. And I think it really works on those levels. And to keep using religious and Christian terms, I think that the biggest sin that Mother is guilty of is really that it doesn't really work outside of its main allegorical setting. I mean, as a horror movie, it's really quite unremarkable. As a member of the audience, I would want to feel unsettled, uneasy, disturbed, frightened, and I really feel none of those things. The whole film is told through Jennifer Lawrence's perspective. The audience should be empathizing with her. I mean, what's going on is absolutely insane. I hate when people invade my space. So when you get dozens and dozens and hundreds of people that flock to your house uninvited, I should really be going nuts and feeling uneasy and really empathizing with Jennifer Lawrence's character, feel what she's feeling and see the world through her eyes and how messed up and fucked up this situation is, because it is. None of that really works, and the problem is because I'm always 10 steps ahead of her because I've read the Bible. I know what's going to happen. I know everybody that's in place. I know how it's going to play out, and I'm just waiting for it to play out throughout the film. The best example of this I can give is that at one point in the film, she's pregnant. And yeah, I've read the New Testament. I know what happens to the Son of God. So, eventually it plays out the way it's supposed to play out, and I really couldn't care less. And what that does is that totally deprives the film of having any suspenseful scenes and really the spectator of any sentiment of dread. And this is reinforced by Aronofsky's directorial choices. The first scene in the film is, like I mentioned before, I think, the creation of the universe. So you see Javier Bardem place this stone on a mantelpiece and create the house in which he lives and create Jennifer Lawrence out of nothing. And from the get-go, you know that you're in the supernatural. You know that you're in an allegorical place. And again, there's no space for the supernatural, the unease, the dread to emerge. And as I was going home, I was sort of thinking about the film, and immediately what popped into my head was those Renaissance paintings that depict either Greek mythology or scenes from the Bible. And those are paintings that I don't really derive any emotional reaction from. I do get a certain amount of intellectual joy from trying to just look at everything that's in the frame and trying to piece out, okay, this represents this, and this obviously represents this, and this person is this person. And, I tend to respond to more impressionistic, abstract paintings. So if you look back there's a painting, I can't afford a painting, but there's a poster of Chagall, who's one of my favorite artists ever. And I don't always have a clear understanding of what's represented in the painting, but I do know that when I look at it, I get a strong emotional reaction from it. It kind of soothes my soul, and it makes me happy. Or maybe it terrifies me or whatever, but at least I have a strong emotional reaction and not just a pure intellectual one. And I think that really cannot be said for Mother. Mother really just satisfies me on a pure intellectual level, but never really goes beyond that, which I feel the great films do. And, all throughout the movie, I was looking at this story about a writer with writer's block in a secluded house in the countryside, and all I was thinking was, man, I wish I was watching The Shining. And to be clear, that's not to say it's a bad film. There are many really interesting aspects to it, and it's clearly very well made. I was really delighted to see a film shot in Super 16 on a massive screen. and it's, you know, that graininess and the softness that Super 16 brings, to a point where at certain moments I was really asking myself, is that shot out of focus, or is just the photography super, super soft? And I really do admire Aronofsky as a filmmaker. I think he deserves our support, and to label this film a failure, to label this film like a piece of crap like some people have, I think is overstepping it. But I do think within his filmography, it's really his weaker film, and I'm hoping a lot of people will go back and reevaluate Noah, which is a movie that I absolutely loved, but I feel like I was one of the only ones. A lot of people seem to be really pissed off by it. But for me, it was much more interesting as a biblical fable, and in essence really represents what the Bible stands for, which is the promotion of glorious, glorious incest.
I ate all of my dinner. I ate all my dessert. Now my mama can't bitch. Now my daddy can't bitch.